So what are the consequences for children who are subjected to developmentally inappropriate standards? Well, if we go back to that case of little Jimmy who scribbled on Susie's paper, you know, what will happen when the child just stares at her in confusion? The teacher's going to think like, oh, you know, what a little psycho, right? He doesn't even empathize. He can't even tell me what this other kid's thinking or how she's feeling. So the teacher might walk away thinking there's something wrong with him. They might even communicate that to the parents, that they really need to work on empathy at home because their child is showing signs that they're not empathetic towards other kids. And the kid's obviously going to see the disapproval on the parent's face, or on the teacher's face too. So this is what's at stake with standards that are not developed with careful consideration for what's developmentally appropriate. First of all, it's, you know, from the child psychologist perspective, you're going to stress out the kid. I'm going to be real busy because I specialize in anxiety, because I'm going to have a lot of really anxious kids. But it's going to affect the classroom as a whole, because the curriculum is going to include lessons and strategies that aren't appropriate, and the teacher's going to have to go over and over and over them to nail those down. And it's really going to leave less time for grade appropriate materials and really no time for repeating those or repetition. So I'm going to talk about math facts later and when to introduce those, and I'll defer to Professor Milgram, but I'll give a stab at it. But the other things are just what I talked about. The teachers are going to see typically developing children as delayed. Parents may be informed that their children are behind, and kids are going to get measured against inappropriate standards and might be held back or tracked into remedial classes that they don't really need. So this is I'm assuming all of you have probably seen the standards, but this is actually one of the parts of the math standards. These are called mathematical practices, and these are the same from kindergarten all the way up to 12th grade. So after your crash course in child development, I want you to read those and pick out the ones that aren't exactly developmentally appropriate for kindergartners. And your eye's going to go right to number 2, right? So you're going to see that this says that, you know, students of mathematics in kindergarten should reason abstractly. And we actually know that's basically impossible for them. In general, I see this with Common Core, and other people, as they discuss math and English standards later, can sort this out for me. But what I kind of saw was that they saw this college and career readiness goal, and then they backed those standards down all the way to kindergarten. So instead of thinking about what's developmentally appropriate for a kindergartner, they're thinking, this is where we want that kindergartner to wind up. Let's track this all back down to kindergarten and have them work on those skills in a kindergarten way. There's some major flaws with that. We can train students to answer questions. You can train a second grader to answer abstract questions, but you have not really changed the internal process of understanding abstraction. You have trained them to answer questions. But you see this all throughout the standards. They'll talk about fewer, deeper, not a mile wide and an inch deep. They're always deeper standards, fewer and deeper. And really, when I look at them, often they're requiring these children, 8, 7, 9, who are right in the midst of this concrete operational period. Remember, they like concrete operations, no abstractions. And they're requiring them to explain, justify, and apply principles that are abstract in nature. And this is repeated throughout the math standards. It's no longer good enough to know that 7 minus 3 equals 4. You have to explain and justify how you came up with that answer. And probably, you know, if they're going to make you do it the other way around, which you often see them do, you've got to say something about the inverse property of mathematics. And these are really abstract principles for a young child. So if you told your kid, I'm going to give you this watch, and when this watch says 5 o'clock, and you taught him how that works, when it's 5 o'clock, come inside because it's time for dinner, done playing. And that child went outside and he came in when that said 5 o'clock. You would think, I have taught him about the passage of time. He knows how to keep track of things, and he knows when to get inside. But if that watch stops working at 4:50, he's going to happily play for hours and hours and hours, because you've not really helped him to internalize the concept of the passage of time. You know, adults will eventually say, hey, it's been a while. We better check on that. Kids are not going to think that. He's going to be looking at his watch if you've got him well trained. Here are a few of the really specific standards that I wanted to pick on. But this one seemed a little odd to me. Distinguish shades of meaning among related words that describe states of mind or degrees of certainty. I don't know why that's important in 3rd grade, but it certainly is asking kids to think abstractly. They've got to think about their state of mind, other people's states of mind, and then apply it to these words. And I don't think they're looking for concrete explanations. They really want to know about the nuance. This one comes under that standard of nuances, the understanding that words have nuances and what the nuances are between words. I tried this on my 8-year-old. She's pretty smart, but she just kept repeating back. I said, what's the difference between knew and believe? She said, well, when you know it, you know it. But if you just believe it, you just believe it. Like, you're right. You know, I knew what she was saying, but she didn't have the words to say it. So I'm not sure if that would be counted right on these assessments that come out, though. You know, she's going to have to be trained to say something different, even though her understanding is probably not going to be affected one way or the other. So I like this explanation that, you know, if you're a kindergarten teacher and you are trying to make your math very abstract, and you hear one of your little kids using Cinderella in the word problem, that Cinderella had 2 apples, and she gave her friend an apple. How many apples does she have left? Woo, that's not abstract, right? Like, this, you should know the difference between fantasy and reality if you understand abstraction. So she's going to have to engage in a long discussion with this girl about how Cinderella is not real. And she may even convince her, right? She could say, Cinderella talks to mice, and they understand her, and she understands them. No people can do that, right? And the girl would be, oh, yeah, you're right. You know, Cinderella must not be real. She can talk to mice. But did she really internalize, did you turn that switch on for her? Did you make her understand the difference between fantasy and reality? Well, no, you didn't. You just trained her to say Cinderella isn't real. And she might be walking away thinking, you know, like, oh, those darn mice, why are they in the movie? Because if they weren't in the movie, then Cinderella would be real. And then you ask her, well, is the Little Mermaid real? And she'll say, well, yeah, there's no mice in that movie. You know, like, it's cool. She's good. Like, Little Mermaid is indeed real. Now, if you had just waited until she was 7, she'd be like, oh, yeah, she's not real. You wouldn't have had to teach it to her. She would just really understand it because her brain could understand that by now.